Fairclough, how are you?
Good evening to you, Francois. I'm glad I don't work for the Pentagon.
Glad you don't work for BP? Glad you don't work for the Pentagon?
Well, some of those staffers at the Pentagon are going to be spending most of their summer looking through 90,000 documents that WikiLeaks put online. A huge piece of work detailing really what the US have been up to in Afghanistan over the past 5 years or so. So the Pentagon is now has the difficult task now of looking into those documents to see whether any of this stuff compromised US security.
That's right, and they went to it was done with 3 publications: The Guardian, Der Spiegel, and the New York Times. And I noticed throughout the day that the New York Times was able to change the top story on its front page with different stories from the WikiLeaks.
Imagine 90,000 documents. You've got an absolute wealth of information there, really, for some key events as well throughout the past 5 years. Possibly, though, Francois, the most damaging allegations aren't perhaps to do with US military involvement, but it's Pakistan. Remember, Pakistan's been a key ally of the US for as long as this war in Afghanistan has been going on. Some of the most serious documents there allege that the Pakistan secret services were in fact supplying the Taliban. You can see there one of the allegations is that the ISI, that's the Pakistan secret service, sent 1,000 motorbikes to an Afghan warlord to be used in suicide bombings. Another allegation that 3 Pakistani men were trained to go and assassinate Hamid Karzai. Clearly, that one didn't work out. And a more bizarre one.
Logistics for the attack on the Indian embassy in Kabul.
Absolutely, in 2008. Indeed, the list goes on. And perhaps a more bizarre one, I was just going to say, and one perhaps that gives credence to some of the skeptics about these documents, is that the ISI was involved in poisoning beer that was supposed to find its way to coalition troops in Afghanistan. That might be a bizarre one, but the substantive documents remain pretty sinister. What you're effectively accusing your point man, i.e. Pakistan, of actually fighting a war by proxy during the whole time that you're trying to suppress the Taliban.
And Pakistani authorities' reaction?
Well, one of the expressions they used today was far-fetched. They said that most of these documents do not reflect the reality on the ground. Going back to the US again, though, what was interesting for me was that you're not really getting the US disputing the veracity of these documents.
No, they said it all happened before December 2009.
That's right, before Barack Obama drew up his Afghanistan strategy, if you like. What they're saying was really all these things about Pakistan were then, this is now. And they're saying that Pakistan really is on board as a coalition partner. If you look, there are certain examples that the US would point to. You remember the controversy over using drones, that was unmanned spy planes. The US had got into a lot of hot water using those on Pakistan territory. Under Obama's watch, they've been allowed to go into Pakistan territory and take out key Taliban targets. That's an example of where the US will say, look, Pakistan is on board as a key ally.
And some of these military officers in Pakistan are not yet retired. Some of them are still active.
Indeed, yeah, and many of them are going to have to answer questions in the coming months over exactly what part they played in this. Perhaps.
And I was going to say that raises the next point, which is by publishing and by naming and shaming people, does it put the coalition troops in danger?
That's the big question, of course. And the US today has said that most of these documents, if not all of them, weren't top secret. They were secret. So a lot of the information was already out there and, crucially, hasn't compromised US troops. For example, the kind of documents that could compromise US troops' safety would be orders, things like missions and so on. Most of that information does date very quickly, and WikiLeaks said it hasn't compromised any US soldiers. Having said all that, though, there are certain sections of the British Army who aren't very happy with what WikiLeaks has done. They think that they've effectively given the Taliban lots of information about tactics. Here's one former US-British commander in Afghanistan, Richard Kemp.
We'll be poring over every single word of those reports, scrutinising them even more closely than their own analysts, to see what they can find out about the way we operate against them, and critically how much we know about their capabilities and intentions. And all of that information, no matter how historic some of it is, and some of it's actually quite recent, will be useful to the Taliban.
So that was Richard Kemp, a former commander of British forces in Afghanistan. Of course, the big spotlight as well has been on WikiLeaks. This is a site that's only existed for just over 3 years, founded by a gentleman by the name of Julian.
I was going to say a one-man army.
Yeah, very much so, with a small staff who are researching this. He's been asked really whether he's been asked whether this really will get under the skin of the US government, and it is worth reminding you of a video that in fact was leaked to WikiLeaks. This was a video of a US helicopter shooting dead 2 cameramen in Iraq. That caused massive consternation. Absolutely, that caused huge consternation when that was released. In fact, the US soldier who released that video to WikiLeaks, he's just been charged with releasing classified documents. One of the things that the questions really is how much impact this will have, how much lasting impact this will have. You mentioned the Pentagon papers in the Vietnam War, of course. That really did blow the lid on how that war was being prosecuted. Julian Assange, the founder of Wikipedia, isn't that optimistic that in fact any of these documents will produce any lasting changes? Let's listen to what he has to say.
The US Army is an enormous boat that is extremely hard to turn around, and the cover-up of those sorts of crimes begins at the bottom and moves its way to the top. So it is quite hard to enact a new policy and have it filter down to a change in practice.
So in other words, he's not going away.
He's not going away. He's going to keep going. In fact, he thinks there's around another 260,000 documents still to come. So there's lots more for the Pentagon to be combing through in the next weeks and months.
All right, Owen Fairclough, many thanks. That's it for this edition of Live from Paris on France 24. Christophe Robit is next with The Week in Europe.